I'm not doing my usual opening costume bit for this one, as it would be a bit weird considering it's about a team of ass-kicking women. That different team.
Electric Box!
This film is weird. I've talked about weird films on this channel before that have been weird in different ways, from the "what the hell is happening in this" to the "why the hell did anyone make this?" Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch is weird in its own special way. When the film debuted in 2011, it was met with a rather scathing reception of largely negative reviews, including, in the interest of honesty, from me. I compared it unfavorably to Inception, and basically implied it was a vehicle to show sexy girls in a variety of scenes that wouldn't fit in any other context. And to a large degree, I stand by that. It is those things. But it's not only those things. What else it is far less straightforward, so I've come to pick around in its head and see if I can't unravel what's going on.
Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind?
I decided to give it a second look after seeing the director's cut of Zack Snyder's much maligned Batman vs. Superman film. A lot of the complaints which have been engendered by the theatrical release, chiefly that of being choppy and incoherent, didn't seem to be the case in the longer cut. One can possibly chalk this up to the fact that I don't have any real nostalgic investment in these comics, and thus perceived narrative problems with them wouldn't be likely to get under my skin the way you would do with, like, say, fucking up Star Wars. But Snyder's Watchmen also benefited greatly from an extended cut, and that's a comic for which I've long held great respect. So it seemed it was only fair to give Sucker Punch another chance. This is, as previously stated, a weird film. It's not one which easily fits into an obvious category. It has obvious antecedents, such as the aforementioned Inception, as well as Pan's Labyrinth and Shutter Island. It doesn't really pack the punch of any of those, but in its own way it's oddly subversive in that it basically tells the audience that they shouldn't like it. Now, I don't mean that metaphorically as one would if discussing, say, Battlefield Earth, which certainly encourages audiences not to like it. No, I mean as in dialogue spoken by the main character mocks the film's very premise and basically suggests that they might be happier watching something else.
Really?
For those who don't know, and if you don't, you should probably stop watching about now, the film is about a girl who, in an attempt to protect her kid sister from an abusive stepfather, accidentally kills the sister herself and is committed to an asylum, where the stepfather pays off an orderly to forge a recommendation for a lobotomy, to keep her from telling the police just why she was firing that gun at him in the first place. And rather shockingly, this is exactly what ends up happening. The film itself describes the situation as such.
I get the sexy little schoolgirl. I even get the helpless mental patient, right? That can be hot. But what is this? Lobotomized vegetable? Don't you get the point of this? It's to turn people on. How about something a little more commercial?
Thus, enter something more commercial, a team of ass-kicking chicks in sexy costumes who fight zombies and dragons and robots, which is largely how the film was sold. That, essentially, is the point of the name, as the expectation-defying ending doesn't really pack the same impact. A lot of the negative reaction might have come from audiences who felt bait and switched on, and for whom the rationalization that that was the point all along wouldn't have really been much of a consolation. There might also have been a sense of betrayal from what would seem to be the intended audience. For all of its fetishizing of the girls, they are at least sympathetic. Most of the male characters, on the other hand, are loathsome bastards, particularly in their treatment of women. And a lot of gamers and anime fans might have come away from the experience thinking that the film was castigating them. Maybe it was. Snyder characterized it as a comment on the men sitting and watching it, implying the girls were sexed up because of audience expectations. Perhaps so, but there's a very fine line to be walked when criticizing the very thing you're providing yourself. I'm all for criticizing geeks and geek culture, but I don't think that aspect came across very efficiently.
You didn't quite make it.
On the other hand, the film toys with some interesting ideas. A few minutes ago I said that this was the main character, when a casual viewing would seem to imply that it's Emily Browning's character, known only in the film as Baby Doll, though a quick shot of a document seems to indicate that her real name is M. Reeves. Memories? Or a reference to Zack Snyder's mother, Martha Reeves? I'm getting off track. You'd assume the film was about her. But it's Abby Cornish's Sweet Pea who narrates the beginning and ending of the film and who proclaims straight up,
I'm the star of the show, remember?
And this is only a minute after this fact is made quite implicit. The scene of the impending lobotomy switches one girl for the other, who reveals the first as a persona she's wearing. This alternate personality is first shown to us sitting on an empty stage, which will be revealed later as a stage in the asylum where Sweet Pea is being encouraged to act out her fantasies. She tells us,
"Everyone has an angel, a guardian who watches over us. They can speak through any character we can imagine. They'll shout through demons if they have to, daring us, challenging us to fight."
In other words, this character is a projection of Sweet Pea's subconscious, who will indeed goad her into fighting back against her captivity. Even this poster in the girl's dressing room hints at this idea. Through the opening sequence, we see her imaginary proxy live out the scenario that likely landed her in this place, and this part is key, because it seems to be that this is frequently misunderstood for some reason. Many reviews describe the situation as being one where Baby Doll is framed for her sister's murder by her stepfather, the actual killer. This is plainly false if one simply watches the scene. Sister alive as the father kicks in the door, father still standing in the doorway with no weapon as he's confronted by Baby Doll, and then sister dead and bleeding after her second bullet passes through him. This oddly common misunderstanding may be a factor in the opinions of these reviewers, as coming from that assumption, nothing that happens later could possibly make any sense. The guilt over the accidental shooting is what motivates the rather bleak choice made at the end.
Have you just ever wanted to just take something back? You know, something you said, something you did, all the time.
These are two halves of the same girl who has but one mission: protect the little sister. Jenna Malone's Rocket is the first to bond with the newcomer, seemingly to the confusion of the others.
You best friends now?
We see her repeatedly get in trouble with one or the other version of Big Sister coming to her aid. Ultimately, of course, in reality, that battle has already been lost, and that fact is something she has to accept, even as she recasts the event as a noble sacrifice instead of a tragic accident. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I have to describe the structure of the film and what, if anything, can be considered as reality. This part is tricky, because I'm not sure that any part of the film besides this shot can be definitively argued as being real. Everything else is suspect. Very near the end of the film, we discover that the corrupt orderly, in addition to bribe-taking and forgery, has also been taking liberties with the inmates, whom he considers his property.
I look out for them. These are my girls.
It's not surprising then that our protagonist, whichever these two you think that is, sees the asylum as a brothel where the girls are being held against their will, and the orderly is the pimp.
The girls and you are mine.
They also see the doctor demoted in status, probably because due to her lack of knowledge of what's happening in her house, they view her as either complicit or just ineffectual protecting them from Oscar Isaac's Blue. This frankly is pretty dark material. Blue, looking for payback for that knife wound she gave him, is actually upset that Baby Doll won't be aware of what he's doing to her in her lobotomized state. And then there's the aforementioned
Something a little more commercial.
wherein our heroine disassociates from one faux reality, an allegory where she's being exploited, to a deeper, more abstract one, where she and eventually her friends have agency and power and begin enacting an escape plan. This is where things begin to get wobbly. Each of these fantasy missions is meant to represent an actual goal in the larger plan of escaping the asylum, but they're abstracted to the point that there's very little metaphor in most of the events in these scenes. It's not always so. The scene involving the fight with the dragon connects in a number of ways. They're trying to lift a lighter from a patron's pocket, and we see that action mimed when they pull the crystals from the dragon's neck. Their imaginary mentor's advice,
Don't wake them up.
which they do, can be seen as a manifestation of their worries of arousing the suspicions of Blue, which they also do. The dragon targets these two girls, and Blue does likewise. And of course, Baby Doll ultimately stabs both of them. On the other hand, the second fantasy sequence, and the first featuring the whole group of girls, is not only the longest, but the most arbitrary. They're after a map in the fantasy, because that's also what they're after in the reality. But the reality is that Sweet Pea sends Blue out of his office with the message that his favorite new girl is dancing, and then photocopies the map. This is represented by zombie soldiers, blimps, trench warfare, and a giant robot. While all of these things are pretty cool, if there's a metaphor in any of them, it's not hiding in plain sight. In parts like these, we can see Zack Snyder somewhat getting in his own way, doing a neat scene for its own sake rather than in service of the story he's trying to tell. There are thematic ideas to be found here, the song White Rabbit and the rabbit on the battle mech call to mind Alice in Wonderland. In fact, at one point the camera actually does go through the looking glass.
Electro weird.
And the steam escaping the zombies may well be a callback to the first blood drawn in our hero's reality. The very presence of the zombies itself may be a reminder of what set all this in motion.
Don't feel bad. Stop killing them. They're already dead.
We're already dead.
But it's hard to know for sure. While Inception is the most often referenced influence, it's notable that Sucker Punch was in development as far back as 2007, so any influence that Nolan's dreamscape vision may have had on the film is probably minimal at best. A more definitive candidate for inspiration is Terry Gilliam's Brazil, which saw a government worker escaping the drudgery of his life and job by envisioning himself as a winged and armored hero who fights monsters, including a giant samurai, representing the dystopian world in which he lives, and who eventually provides the ultimate escape for our sadly powerless protagonist. The parallels are obvious, but Brazil has a more focused vision and more successfully marries its reality and fantasy sequences. The scenes are less elaborate and more concise in their meanings. We see how Sam Lowry wishes himself to be, and we see the flaws inherent in who he is, just as he does in the film's reality. His fantasy persona gradually begins pursuing his personal interests and forgets about the plight of the everyday people he, as a government employee, is supposed to be serving. I'm not sure why the obstacle of the cook is represented by an army of robots on a train. I'm not sure why this girl living in the late 1950s is imagining most of these things either. The film feels quite deliberately anachronistic, with all of the songs appearing therein hailing from a later time period, along with a visual sense cribbed from a style of Japanese animation that wouldn't exist for decades. Not being limited by reality is a strength of storytelling in general, but it usually helps to be limited by a sense of internal logic. One suspects that the choice of time period might have been motivated by the fact that such medical procedures really aren't performed anymore. It's the ending, however, that's truly the most unconventional thing about the film. We generally expect stories about the powerless gaining power to result in their victory, and an unambiguous one. Sucker Punch ends with a resolution true to its name and one riddled with ambiguity and uncertainty. It's also one which was initially hobbled by the MPAA, who insisted on cuts to the film in order to secure a PG-13 rating, a goal I hope filmmakers will begin to abandon more and more in the wake of some recent R-rated critical and commercial successes. The scene features the ominously referenced high roller arriving at last, supposedly to liberate our heroine of her virginity, but who actually makes it clear that the choice to do so or not is hers. The removal of the scene was a decision that the film's star found quite annoying, motivated as it was by the attitudes of puritanical old fuddy-duddies who found a girl choosing what to do with her own body to be more objectionable than girls getting murdered by a pimp, which seems a bit ass-backward in terms of priorities.
Hasn't that ever occurred to you, man?
No, it had not occurred to me.
That had not occurred to us, dude.
The scene symbolically represented her acceptance of the impending lobotomy, as it represented
Freedom from guilt. From regret. Freedom to be happy.
which harkens back to the all-important fact of her being responsible for her sister's death, without which this acceptance comes without motivation.
It's the way she looked at me. Like she wanted me to do it.
Her choice to embrace her fate here has an echo in Leonardo DiCaprio's musing in the previous year's Shutter Island.
Which would be worse? To live as a monster? Or to die as a good man?
Bleak, yes. The ending audiences were expecting, probably no. But out of place with what's come before, also probably no. It begins on a stage, a place of theatrics and imagination, and seems to find its escape there as well. It's not even certain that our heroine, our true heroine, really escaped anywhere but into her own head, as there are numerous clues in the final scene indicating it may be no more than another fantasy.
What is it? You're not here? Huh? You're not here anymore? You're in paradise?
Now, there comes a point when one is examining the symbolism and thematic meaning of a film when one is confronted by the possibility, hang on, is it possible I'm completely full of shit? Am I seeing a puzzle film just because I happen to like puzzle films? This is a very healthy attitude, which far too few critics seem to be willing to embrace. Much of the negative criticism comes in from feminists who insist that the film is a case of pandering to a young male demographic who simply like to see attractive women kicking ass.
It treats objects like women, man.
Of course, at the same time, you have articles like this one, which goes out of its way to criticize male audiences who didn't like the film as sexist pigs who live in their parents' basements. A point the author thought was so important, he said it twice, verbatim, in the same article, without bothering to source any study actually indicating the living arrangements of sci-fi fans, or why that should invalidate their opinions.
What's this bullshit?
I actually did look for evidence of any such study and couldn't find any except for this reference in a Washington Post article indicating that no such data was available. While Jezebel claims the film is oppressive and sexist, the Daily Beast claims male audiences are sexist for not embracing it, claiming female protagonists put them off, even though ratings and box office numbers suggest this is complete crap. Like it or hate it, either way, you're a chauvinist asshole.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
Forbes suggested the film was a pro-female preemptive attack on so-called Gamergate culture, which they seem to understand about as well as a business magazine could be expected to, while that paragon of journalistic integrity, Feminist Frequency, opined that the motivation was...
I can just picture the Warner executives in their boardroom meeting being like, we can make the girls sword-wielding and ass-kicking, and women will love it. I got news for you, Warner Brothers. We women? We're not that stupid.
You mean like these women who have clearly embraced the film and its characters and who apparently are stupid for the crime of not agreeing with you?
Usually in my videos, I try to be fairly nuanced about my criticisms of pop culture.
Such as pretending you speak for half of the human race. That's the kind of nuance we could use a little less of. This is the sort of nonsense you get from treating people like demographics instead of individuals. I myself find it odd and perhaps in conflict with what seems to be the film's point to have our heroine imagine herself and her friends dressed in sexed up costumes when they're trying to escape a reality of sexual exploitation. But instead of just assuming what female viewers would think of it, I thought I'd go out on a limb and actually ask some of them. One replied, I honestly love the costumes in the movie, they're badass, and had rather the opposite opinion that such costumes are what a lot of girls prefer, honestly. Another wrote that, I can see why a lot of people take it that way and I understand their feelings, however that's not what I got from it. I was most interested in the companionship the girls shared and how much they cared for each other and would risk for one another. I also noticed that though their costumes were sexy, while they were battling there were only hero shots for the girls and I appreciated that. You only ever see them being powerful. I would agree that the film was gratuitous, but I didn't find it offensive. I actually love this movie as it makes me feel powerful when I watch it. And one girl who described Baby Doll as her favorite butt-kicking heroine addressed this point as follows. I always found it interesting and quite intriguing that Baby Doll chooses to escape her reality through a fantasy world in her mind that focuses solely on sexual exploitation and the beauty of women. At first, when I watched the movie, I thought perhaps this was just a way to sell the film, but as I became more of a fan and started analyzing it for cosplay purposes, I've gained a different perspective on the situation entirely. I now believe that there may have been some underlying themes and elements that happened in her past, such as abuse from her father, possibly on sexual levels, that caused Baby Doll to create this worldview of and for herself. This is the world and reality that she knows so well, and in turn twisted into a heroic fantasy adventure to cope with her time in the asylum. I've always found people criticizing the fact that the female protagonists wear revealing outfits. However, I've never found this much of a concern, and it's actually quite empowering for me. Now, I personally can't actually relate to any of this, but the fact is, do I really need to? If a person finds a film personally uplifting and inspiring, I'm not going to have the gall to tell them they're wrong to feel that. And frankly, they seem to be having a lot of fun with it. You know, fun. That thing that the perennially victimized never seem to grasp.
Yeah, this is awesome. We can have it both ways. We can fulfill the desires of the 15-year-old boy market by having semi-naked chicks in action.
It's a little limiting to say that it comes from a 12-year-old boy's mind, because I know when I was a 12-year-old girl, I was also imagining fantastical characters. And, you know, when I imagine the ultimate version of myself, it's not, you know, me in sweatpants, sort of like, you know, like rolling around on the ground. It's me as like some sort of fantastical superhero that's like, you know, sexy and confident and powerful and vulnerable and all of these different things.
Hollywood, you need to get over the simplistic notion that sexy chicks doing dude stuff is somehow empowering.
What the hell is dude stuff?
I don't know, sir.
Wasn't the entire point of the women's movement to get rid of old gender role stereotypes? How little do you think of your own sex? You do know there are women in the Marines, right?
When they go into these fighting worlds, they're strong, and so if boys find that sexy, then I love that. That's fantastic.
So what about my interpretation? It's exactly that, my interpretation and nothing more than that, neither confirmed nor denied by its director.
I wanted to create a slightly ambiguous, what does it mean as far as, is she there, is she not? Like, what mental state is she in? What is her connection to Sweet Pea? Is she imagining Sweet Pea, or has Sweet Pea really gotten away? Those are sort of the questions that I think you need to ponder at the very end of the movie. I mean, I hope you do anyway.
But one which makes sense to me. There is no male point of view or female point of view. There are just individual points of view.
You're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Now, I can no more justify generalizing my view of the film or those of my correspondents as to how women do or should view the film than I could Feminist Frequency's negative one, though I'll note only one of those presumed to speak for women as a whole.
I'd sooner trust a cobra.
As a storytelling vehicle, even in the extended cut, the film has issues. It's ostensibly the story of 5 girls, but really ends up being the story of 3, as 2 of them really don't emerge with much story or characterization. It also suffers somewhat from what I call Scream syndrome, or the idea that you can legitimately criticize a genre while still aping its tropes in a sort of self-aware way. In the end, I feel it falls into the category of glorious mess, a project that aimed high and fell short. But I'll almost always take an ambitious misstep over some play-it-safe, cookie-cutter crowd pleaser. Almost. There are limits. If Sucker Punch did one thing consistently, it was to draw out strong opinions from all sides, and whether it meant to or not, hold up a mirror to audience expectations. It's not a litmus test to determine whether or not you, the viewer, are some woman-hating knuckle-dragger. It's a Rorschach test to determine which part of your own worldview you're going to project on it. As the protagonist of the director's previous film once asked,
"Tell me, what do you see?"
It's you.
That's gotta be the best smear trick ever.
Let me hit that down to my side. Typical side on the floor. I let myself a cloud with those sucker punch. Let me hit that down to my side. Typical side on the floor. I let myself a cloud with those sucker punch.
Oh, and one last thing. The least charitable assumptions about everyone's motives makes the whole world into assholes.